Hey everybody, this video is called The Grades of Rosicrucianism, what they are and what they're not. Now, the grades of Rosicrucianism, this grade structure, is used by the Golden Dawn, it's used by the Ordo Templi Orientis, it's used by the Societas Rosicruciana, there are a couple of those hanging out there. Let's see, it's also used by the Builders Viatitum, Servants of the Light, and probably dozens of others as well. Now, they all basically have the same names, all attributed to the same version of the Tree of Life. Now, this grade structure, originally, to the best of my knowledge, came about in the late 1800s. Probably the Societas Rosicruciana at Anglia was the first to use them. And if you remember my Golden Dawn video part 1, I believe we went over them as far as it being Neophyte, Zelator, Practicus, Philosophus, Adeptus Minor, Adeptus Major, Adeptus Exemptus, Magister Templi, Magus, and Ipsissimus. Now, this grade structure exists primarily for two reasons. One is to give you a roadmap, a benchmark. We've talked a lot about how this Tree of Life can be a map of human psychology. It can also be a map of mystical and magical attainment. So when you find different imbalances within your mind, within your emotions, within your overall subtle bodies, your complete being, you can look at what parts of yourself might be out of balance, and the Tree of Life is an available system of correlation to show you where those imbalances might be, how to address them. It also makes a fine palette of powers. You know, I talk a lot about the elements and the planets as a fine palette of powers, but using the energy of the Sephiroth directly can be an excellent way to open up a lot of magical applications. The second reason that this grade structure exists is, of course, for organizational structure. Now, there are a lot of different ways that groups of people coming together can organize themselves, but, you know, especially in the era from which this grade system emerged, all seemed to come out of England before World War II, before they gave up their claim to owning the world. So imperialism was kind of just in the soul of the British people. So hierarchical structures where someone had to be at the top issuing the orders was so deeply ingrained in assumption that even, you know, the great mystics didn't always question it, all right? And this can actually be very necessary in a lot of fashions, because when you want to get people together, especially the sort of rebel thinkers who become mystics and magicians, it can help to have someone or some group of people who everyone agrees have the authority to dictate what we're doing today and what the curriculum's going to be. Because there is so much material out there when we are looking at mysticism, spirituality, metaphysics, religion, that if you just bring 10 people together who are all on their paths, they're all unique, individual, powerful, creative people engaged in all kinds of study, it can go so many different directions that getting people to just bring their energy together to share in something, rather than fighting over who gets to focus on what today, can end up with so much wasted time that your group just never accomplishes something. So the hierarchical structure can have a purpose in this social setting. You know, it also has a lot of hideous downfalls, though. If you look at the history of, seems like just about everybody who has ever claimed any of the grades at the top of the Tree of Life, they all tend to have one thing in common, and that is that the more you learn about who they really are, the harder it is to take them seriously. Whether we're looking at Aleister Crowley, or whether we're looking at MacGregor Mathers, or whether we're looking at some of the more modern people who like to attribute themselves to this part of the Tree of Life. Now, I'm not saying there aren't people that, in some fashion, have a right to these names. It's just that, you know, the ones who are embracing the fact that any grade like that serves a primarily social function, they're probably not trying to tell the world how amazing they are. That being said, let's take a look at this. Now, something that's been often noted is that the majority of degree structures that exist in various metaphysical societies and communities, whether it's Rosicrucians in their many forms, or whether it's Wiccans or other modern practitioners who derive much of their structure from Wicca, where we find the original source of the whole grade structure is in Freemasonry. And Blue Lodge Masonry today has 3 grades, Apprentice, Fellow, and Master. In the old days, the 4th grade was also pretty important, of the Archmaster. And now we see on the Tree of Life, where we have our Mind-Body demarcation, our Veil of Parakeet, and our Abyss, nicely divides it up into 4 chunks, 4 grades, 4 degrees. So you have your Neophyte, and often Neophyte and Zealoter would both be put right at the bottom. This is where you're still a normal human being, you know. And then you have your Initiate level, which is your Theoricus, Practicus, Philosophus. They're kind of grouped in the same outer order usually, but there is kind of a difference between that Neophyte level and then the Initiate level. And then you have your Adept level, and then you have your Abyss. You have a 1st degree, 2nd degree, 3rd degree, 4th degree. Okay? Now, if we go back to Masonry, what we find that's very interesting is that we have it correlated to the dawn, the midday, the dusk, and midnight, or birth, adulthood, maturity and old age, and death. And we see this within Wicca too, as far as we have the maiden, the mother, the crone, and then we have the dark of the moon, that passage through death. Okay? 3 phases of the moon, the waxing, full, waning, and new moon. Okay? Now here is the huge danger with this whole thing. We've taken an idea that's ultimately cyclical. It's very cyclical, and we've put it in a linear hierarchy. Okay? Something you notice about the sun and the moon is that after they attain that cycle, they start right back over at the beginning, every single time since the beginning of time. And yet, humans being as they are, there's this massive tendency for the ego to want to be the king or the queen. We all want to be the person who is the most highly attained and just gets to be that forever. We don't like the cyclical nature of it. We resist this, and so in keeping with the imperial culture that we have all been socialized into, we just inherently desire to get to the cool degrees, you know, and that makes sense. It does. It really does. And a huge amount of the instability, inner politicking, bickering, and altogether lack of functionality that is observed in so many metaphysical and occult societies really stems from this grade structure. Because whether it's because someone bestows it upon you or whether you have an experience, one way or another, you want to tell everyone, no, I'm not the Neophyte, I'm not just the Initiate, I'm the Adept, or I'm the whatever. And, you know, one way to address that is to understand that this Tree of Life, it can be scaled so many different ways. I'll tell you some personal stories. The first time I ever thought I had reached enlightenment or attained ipsissimus, you know, I was 19 and I had this experience of melting into the light, expanding out into the cosmos, unifying with all things, and experiencing kind of all life and the layers behind it and the meaning behind it simultaneously. And then when I condensed back down into a physical form, I was like, damn, I made it. Couldn't remember a shred of it because the human brain is not really capable of containing that kind of experience. So the point of having it, I don't know, maybe that's just your holy guardian angel's way of saying, oh, you are a messed up kid, let's just cram some experience into your head so that you can understand that you are part of something larger than yourself. You know, but obviously, oh, I've made it, it's great. and then go back to normal life and realize, I am still not in control of everything. I'm not the ultimate wise one. I can't just do that again at will. How strange. Maybe that I thought was obsessivist was really just kind of crossing that mind-body demarcation, or maybe it was experiencing Parakeet for the first time, or maybe I had attained Kether, but when you use the Tree of Life, a full Tree of Life within each Sephiroth, maybe I had just completed my work in the bottom Sephiroth, you know? Disciplining myself from the ages of 16 to 19, there was 3 years, and I got a cookie at the end of it. So, anytime you feel like you've attained a great and high magical grade, you can always just scale it down back to where you're a normal human being like everybody else, which is an important thing to do. There is a true virtue in humility. And I know a lot of us don't like that. A lot of us resist the idea of humility. We look at the fact that the word humility shares the same root as the word humiliation, and we say, Judeo-Christian imperialism wants us all to just subject ourselves to the will of others, so we're always being told to be humble, not judge. And in a social construct, I can see how it can be very negative to not judge or to lack confidence. I've had a lot of experiences of that myself, where being humble can really just fuck things up because there are always people looking to take advantage of that. However, from the perspective of your spirituality, humility is not just a virtue or a nice thing to aspire to. It is an absolute necessity to maintain your sanity. Now, the next time that I thought I had reached obsessiveness was when I was granted the 3rd degree in a more or less more modern version of Wicca now, and that you have a 3-degree system, and I of course went back and correlated it to the Tree of Life because I've always had a love of it. So I was like, 1st degree, 2nd degree, 3rd degree would be that. And you know, in that system, kind of the mark or the requirement was the ability to get into your soul self, be able to see into your other living incarnations, share telepathic experiences with people, that kind of stuff. So obviously, I had to be obsessiveness. That had to be beyond the abyss. Oh, God. You know, I was 22, so I will forgive myself for being such a rank, arrogant amateur. You know, and then, of course, my big humility was to realize, no, that's just Adeptus Minor. The abyss is something beyond that. You know, Tiferet consciousness, that's the soul that projects into multiple incarnations. That's where you get past life memories, regardless whether they're actually past lives or just perception of a higher level of self projecting itself in multiple different timelines. Depends on how seriously you take the whole concept of time. But, you know, you can always scale that back down. You can throw that all the way back down to Yesod. You could say that is just your first entrance into the Yetziratic world. There's always a way to expand the tree, to humble yourself. And it's not just important for your sanity to realize that no matter what you attain in this life, you're not a god. You're not. I mean, really, if you look at what the gods are, we're not meant to be gods. They're a different function than we are. No matter what we attain, even if in some circumstances we might have more influence than a certain god at a certain moment in time, we're not them any more than they are us. Two different things going on there. But it's not just important to maintain some sense of connection to the rest of humanity and some level of sanity. It's also important to not limit yourself, because, you know, this egotistical desire to always have attained the highest, well, you know, if you graduate high school and you're like, I know everything, all that means is that you're not going to college, all right? And if you finish college and you're like, I finished it, all that means is that you're not going to go very far in your professional development because you're setting your sights too short, all right? No matter how far you progress, there's more. No matter how real it becomes, it's not as real as it could be. No matter how deeply in harmony you are, there's a deeper harmony to be attained. And those moments of peak experience you know, we're part of a cycle. You get back down into the flesh, you get back down into the egotism, you get back down into who you are as a result of your genetics and upbringing and humanity. You get back to living the incarnated drama that you entered into this flesh to live. All right? And you're trying to bring more of that back into the incarnated drama. You're trying to do a better job of living as a human than you did last time. And so these ecstatic experiences are part of your evolution or progress. I don't know if evolution is really the right word there, despite how often we use it. But it's also to give us perspective on this living existence, because one of the big challenges is going through life blind, so gaining more perspective is always helpful. Realizing the cyclical nature of things, and that what you're doing now is what you've done before, whether in this life or in other incarnations. We're trying to do a better job of being humans here, people. We're, you know, with this hierarchical system, with this very imperial royal philosophy, we like to fixate on the idea of being more than human, but really it's about being better at being human. It's not about being above other humans. It's about doing a better job of being a good human for yourself and for everybody else. Now, this doesn't mean we always have to throw out the baby with the bathwater, but we need to address some more issues here, because in a group setting where we are using hierarchy as part of a human function of, you know, we come together, so we want to find parameters of what we're doing, so we have to decide who's going to be the teacher here. Probably a few of us could, but we need a direction that's going to bring people together, that people will accept that our energies are going to align, and even if someone comes into the group who just doesn't want to align with everybody's energy, someone has to have the agreed right to say, hey, you don't belong here, fuck off. And so the grade system can work for that. But one of the huge problems, even within that context, is that whoever's serving at whatever grade that we arbitrarily decide is the one that gets to be the leader, whether it's Adeptus Minor or whether we want to call ourselves the Grand Dragon or whatever the hell we want it to be, you know, when you serve that function in the organizational hierarchy, there can be a danger of assuming that people who are at a lesser place in the organizational hierarchy are actually at a lesser stage of spiritual attainment. Maybe they are. Maybe they are. There's a point in being honest with people about what they haven't attained and what they can still attain, but there can be a huge danger of leaders harming people's energy in attempts to humble them. And this is a lesson that came back to me, you know, once again. I mean, it's come to me many times, but I spent some time with a bunch of hippies quite recently. Went out to a festival, and I was hanging out at the edge of the drum circle, saw this old guy dressed as a wizard, had this really cool hat with some feathers and a robe, and I was like, I'm following that guy. Went back to a yurt and ended up just joining this circle of people who, a few of them knew each other, a lot of us didn't, and yet, just instantly, like almost no effort, to attain a level of communion that some lodges and covens never attain. Because there was an immediate assumption of equality, and kind of the social rule among hippies is that you support each other and validate each other off the bat without requiring proof. And no cutting anybody down ever. And so when you have a lot of people who have that maturity inside them to do that with each other, instantly we're feeding each other's power completely. And in that circumstance where you really do have that love and that trust, you can feed as much validation to everybody else as you want, and yet it does not diminish you at all, because they're feeding it back to you and everybody elevates, and radical magic just comes out of nowhere. It's just like, whoa, it is there. Badass. But there are dangers with that. There's a downside to that, in that in a training environment or an educational environment where most people aren't really going to know what to do with that, being that humble and offering the instant validation can really negate the purpose of even coming together, because nobody's growing, because nobody wants to admit to their own flaws, and no one's willing to call it out because we have this rule of always validating. And that's where this Gebura strength attributed to Mars and its denser manifestations, the ability to bring someone into check, is kind of necessary in any kind of educational or training situation. But there has to be a balance, there has to be a balance as far as being able to tell the truth without cutting somebody down. And so many people who want to be the occult teacher or the leader or the guru, they might not think this is what they're doing, but when they're cutting people down, what they're doing is they're stealing their energy. They're saying, you're not there because I am, and I can see that you're not. And what's actually happening, if you open your sight enough to see it, is that the guru is stealing all the energy from the chela. And of course the guru feels like they genuinely are superior, because the social function is creating an energy flow that makes them superior. They're feeding off of their chelas. Or the Grand Master is feeding off the Neophytes, or whatever. The priest is feeding off of the parishioners. So there has to be a balance between, if we just completely are validating everybody, then nobody is learning because people don't want to be humble. On the other hand, if we're just focusing on ripping people down all the time and preventing their egotism, there's this huge danger of stealing their energy and harming them. So I want to present to you a different glyph and look at how that can be used as a training mechanism, both to view the personal progress of it as well as certain usefulness in an organizational hierarchy that kind of balances things out. And it's not based on the Tree of Life. I won't tell you what the final glyph is. You'll have to watch me put it together, but I think you'll like it. Alright, so we're going to start with a circle. A lopsided circle there. Is that visible on the camera? It is. Awesome. So we're starting with a circle because we want to start with the cyclical nature of growth. Alright, we don't need to start off with a hierarchy when what we're looking at is a cyclical process. So we start with a circle, and I'm going to go ahead and throw a solar cross in the middle of it. Solar, the sun, also your soul, because you, the individual, are at the center of this whole thing. It's already within you, whether or not you are at a point psychologically and spiritually where you truly self-identify with the root of your own being at this point in time is irrelevant, because that root of your being is within you all the time. So this cycle of initiation is, at least in part, really just about getting back to your true self. So let's see, do we want to start in the east or the west? Let's go ahead and start in the east with the rising sun. Okay, Masonry likes to be all about this going from the west to the east, seeking the rising of the sun or the spiritual illumination. I like to go at it from the other direction of the dawning days, the beginning of a thing. So this is where we're going to have our dedicant. Okay, we could also throw in Neophyte, we could throw in a lot of different terms. Probationer is another one that people like because it's like, oh, you're on probation, you haven't joined our group yet. I also like Neophyte because it's, again, diminishing. You're the little seed. I like dedicant because it shows that you've made a decision and you have dedicated yourself to a course of work. Okay, now this dedicant grade, this beginning of the cycle, is an interesting point. It can be, this is when you've decided to join the group. This is when you've decided to join the coven. You've gone through whatever their winnowing process is, and hopefully you've applied your own winnowing process in turn. This could be when you click on the website to take the alchemy class, or whatever it is. This is your decision. Okay? For myself, my first dedicant point was, I don't know, I was probably 15 or 16, did a circle of yarn on the ground, because I guess that's the book I was reading at the time, put candles at the quarters, and did this cool little ritual on the floor, which, you know, I didn't have an altar table at the time. It was also nice and significant, because sitting on the floor to do your ritual is quite humble. It's a humble beginning. I like that about it. Okay? Now, there is an emission from the soul. Okay? The soul is calling you. It's pouring out to you, saying, hey, there's something you need to do here. There's something you need to do here. So there's an outpouring that you're answering to get to this dedicant position. Okay? And then you begin your cycle. Okay? Now the next point, where we attribute the midday, whatever, in an initiation schema, that's where I'd put initiate. That's where I'd put most of your working grades. I would say, if we were to correlate it back to a Golden Dawn cycle, I would actually say this would be your portal, maybe your Adeptus Minor, because this is where the soul has poured energy out to you with dedication. Now, at this initiate point, you are regaining this soul awareness, and you're also getting your full kind of magical tool set within whatever tradition or training regimen you're all about. So right here is where we have what I'll simply call initiate. How well can I write sideways? That is the challenge of the moment. Initiate. Right here at this southern point. The full moon, the noonday sun. Okay? Now, an interesting thing that happens here, at dedicant, you're deciding to embark upon this thing, but the initiate level, and why I call it initiate, is because this is usually the initiation that gives you a feeling of actual membership within whatever it is you've decided to become involved in. This is where you start feeling like one of them, and that'll add another part to the glyph a little later. Okay? But then we progress, we get all these tools, we have our soul experience or whatever, culminating experience of permeating whatever level we're permeating to get to that deeper level of soul awareness, as we are also coming to a point of self-identification with whatever group or tradition we're a part of. And then the cycle continues. Now, this is another area that you could say is Adeptus Minor or Adept. I like to call it Practitioner, because this is where you are practitioner. Alright, Practitioner. This is where, at least in theory, you've pretty much got all the tools, and so now you're doing the cool stuff. You know, in a ceremonial magic context, which is what I tend to be all about, this is where you're going to be practicing things like evocation. This is where you're going to be practicing healing arts. This is where you're going to be really fleshing it out and taking this transcendental awareness with the initiation experience and really putting it into practice and doing it a lot and living the lifestyle of it. You know, this whole, the end of the process of going from dedicating yourself to a path to attaining within the path. Then there's the living of it and actually doing what it is to be that. Okay? Then we get further along the cycle, and we get to what I'll go ahead and call Adept. Because, you know, for the fact that depending on what schema we're using, we could put Adeptus Minor here or here. I like to put it up here because it's such a grandiose term. It's all about recognition for being adept at something. And really that belongs in the death cycle, because you're fulfilling, you're culminating the cycle. And Adept tends to be where you are reaching out to other people, to where you're now being the teacher, to where, for whatever reason, either because, it generally works best if it's because this is what your community is calling on you to do, not because you just feel like being that person, but every once in a while an angel or something will tell you, come and kick you in the ass and tell you to get to work or whatever. We could also call the adept grade the grand jackass grade, because that's where you're usually running your mouth and being available to the general public. So there's that. Okay. Now, what about this in the center? Because, you know, self-identifying, oh, I'm only a dedicant now, I'm only an initiate now, oh, now I get to be a practitioner, now I'm an adept. Someone's told me that I'm allowed to call myself something. Who are you? I can't tell you whether or not you're a witch. I can't tell you whether or not you're a wizard. I mean, I probably could, and I can, and I do sometimes, because people need that validation, and I'm willing to share energy if it's shared in return. I have no problem with that. That's good for people. But you know, that middle of the circle, you know, that's where we get our ideas like, are you a witch? Are you a wizard? Are you yogi? What is your central self-identification? Not what's your, what stage of the cycle are you in, but what are you as a person? For myself, when I'm being fun, I like to call myself a wizard. When I'm being a pretentious asshole, I might go for Magus. You know, and when I'm just being a normal human being, I'm just some guy who likes some weird stuff. So we're going to go ahead and write weirdo as the central, this is what we actually are. We're weirdos, you know? And weird is not a bad word. It comes from the Germanic, you might have seen it spelled W-Y-R-D, kind of an alternative magical energy, not part of normal society or not self-identifying with normal society. We're weirdos, okay? So we're weirdos who, in a course of trying to keep ourselves engaged in progress, and it's cyclical, but it's also a spiral, so it's going somewhere. But, you know, we gotta be in the middle of it the whole time. So you might not have become a dedicant in anything, and yet you still get to be a weirdo. You've attained the highest grade of weirdo, regardless of where you're at on this cycle. So we don't have to worry about all the ego bullshit. Okay? Now, that's in the whole self-development aspect. In the social aspect of how do we get a group of people to work together and pick who we're going to agree gets to make the rules, you know, I would usually say that first completion of the cycle is when a group gets to go ahead and print a certificate off their computer at home and say, yes, you're now the adept. You've finished, you've come to a culmination of our cycle of training, so now we recognize that you've completed our cycle of training, and you now theoretically could give that training to other people if you want to, if that's what's in your life path. It isn't for everyone. You know, maybe instead of giving people training, that's when you go out and become a professional healer or a professional diviner or whatever. It's when you've gone beyond the point of doing these things for yourself in your own life and brought them to the service of the rest of the community. Okay? Now, how are we going to flesh this out? Because the cross and circle I like. Oh, and I also want to point out that these can switch back and forth as far as what the exact experience is happening at any time. Again, when we try to apply very simple glyphs to the complexity of human experience, we end up leaving a lot out. So, at the dedicant stage, you might dedicate into something and have the tools ready to start doing the advanced practices immediately. Okay? You also might get to this advanced practitioner level and realize, wow, you're really just a complete beginner again. Likewise, this initiation point might make you feel like it's time to be out there for everyone and preach it to the world. Or you might get to the point where you're kind of done with a cycle of work and you're comfortable with all that expression of work and you chill out, and instead of being the adept and having all that recognition, you kind of go back to being the initiate of just appreciating your connectedness to everybody and appreciating your membership in whatever it is you're doing and your ability to reside in your soul self. So we can show, I'm not going to sketch it here because it's not part of my cool little glyph, but we can take this cross and circle and put two more circles so that we have our three-dimensional sphere, which is the true shape of most of the cross and circle rituals, is a three-dimensional sphere with a three-dimensional cross within it. We get that front to back too. Anyway, let's not overcomplicate this bloody thing. Alright, so we've got our basic cycle here with our ultimate status as weirdo right in the middle of it all. And I want to go back to the initiate stage, because this is where you gain whatever transcendent goal makes you kind of part of this thing. It's also where you identify with a group of people. And so we're going to add a line for your self-identification, and for that people's acceptance of you, okay? It meets, okay? It goes both directions. There's your self-identification and their acceptance, and then there is whatever knowledge or tradition or belief system unites you. So we get another cross, this solar cross. Now let's call it an earth cross this time. This is what grounds you within membership in a certain group of people, whether it's a Rosicrucian order or a Wiccan coven, or whether it's because you finally feel that you've become a hippie, or whatever your thing is. This group of people who, like you, are weirdos. We're not talking about your membership and just being a human on Earth. We're talking about your membership with a bunch of weirdos is because of your self-identification combined with their acceptance of your self-identification, crossed with whatever belief system is that unites you, okay? So we see the reflection of your inner self in this cycle being reflected in this community that you're part of, and usually you don't feel the instant belonging at the level of dedicant. You might. There's yet more. Interchange. These are not static, fixed concepts. We might put them in a more or less static hierarchical curriculum like the 4 years of a bachelor's degree, just because we want some kind of structure to keep people working together and keep their energies all going in the same direction. But, you know, we can't get too fixated, all right? So we have the reflection of your community as a reflection of yourself, and then the intersection of the beliefs with the people creates the self-identification of that community, okay? Now, then on the other balance of it, we're talking about the idea that this adept, this big word that you use to tell everyone that, hey, I'm the cool one, I know what the hell is going on. It's not just about you at this point in time. It's not about you and your community necessarily either, okay? I like to go ahead and finish this and turn it into the symbol of Mercury, who is the Roman version of Hermes. And Hermes, of course, is equated to Hermes Trismegistus, the founder of Hermetic philosophy. So for our whole initiatory schema here, we now have the Hermetic initiation symbolized with the astrological sign of Mercury, or Hermes, Mercurius. Okay? Now, the moon here, if we look at the qualities of moon, what do we have? We have intuition, receptivity, reflection. So this symbolizes, in my way of thinking, the idea that if you're going to go out there and be the person that everybody's looking at, you need to be looking at what the outside world needs. Not necessarily the people who are members of your little group or your little thing, but the rest of the world. You need to be receptive to that and let the culmination of your work within a spiritual tradition now be articulated into the rest of the world for their benefit as a reflection of what they need. It's not, we don't put the sun up here again so it's all about glorify me, because fuck, nobody's going to take you seriously anyway, except maybe your friends, okay? For the rest of the world, you show them what they need out of what you have become throughout your cycle, all right? And then, of course, in that, we have to move back to dedicant, because every time we hit a certain point on the tree, we need to shrink it back down to see the bigger tree that we're still a part of, and never rest on our laurels and not accept that your first transcendental experience, whatever that may be, is just the culmination of all you ever intend to accomplish, because the universe has so much bloody more waiting for you than that, okay? So there's one of my thoughts on how to meet some of the needs that the old imperial initiatory schemes were intended to meet, and maybe cut out at least some of the egotistical bullshit, because even if you're the grand poobah, we're all still just weirdos. We don't need to fight with each other for who gets to be the cool one. We're all the prettiest one. Alright everybody, so there's my presentation on Rosicrucian initiation, what it is and what it's not. The little opening, my awesome little crayon drawing on notebook paper. I like to call it the Emerald Cross from the Emerald Tablet of Hermes, or we could call it the Hermetic Cross, or whatever. If you write a book about it before I do, feel free to give credit where credit is due, unless it really was your idea first. But if you're not writing a book, you know, share it around. And let's see, what else? Around January, going to be coming out with a new training curriculum. In the meantime, I'll be continuing to make videos probably around Golden Dawn and other traditional themes, but I have been working for quite some time to put together a curriculum of spiritual and magical development, which I feel is streamlined greatly as far as its ability to help you make progress while not closing any doors to any of the older and more complex approaches to the thing. So look for that in January. Toward the end of November, should be launching right around Thanksgiving. There's going to be a new website, integrativemysticism.com, which will feature articles from myself, from Nico of Scarlet Moon, and probably from quite a few other guest writers as well as time goes on. There will also be sections of that website where you can take his classes in tarot and other forms of magic, astrology, practical magic, from a much more diverse perspective, and I will be offering classes there as well in Hermetic and other traditional forms of magic. So keep an eye out for all of that, and with that, friends, fellows, brothers, sisters, people who don't fit into those normal gender identifications, I wish you the best, and whatever courses of training or involvement you may ever choose to pick up, remember, the power is yours, you just have to learn what to do with it. Peace out, everyone.